Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story, where an unexpected decision sets the stage for a journey of change. Today's story is about an heiress who runs away from her lavish world to find herself in the most unlikely place, a hotel she owns. But what happens when she's forced to confront the truth, both about her family and the life she's been hiding from? Our story begins on a rainy afternoon in a small, cozy cafe nestled in the heart of New York City. Lila Brooks, the only heir to the renowned Brooks empire, sat in a corner booth, her fingers nervously twisting a napkin in her hands. She had everything a person could want: luxury, power, and wealth. But as she looked out the window at the gray skies, she felt something was missing. Her life was a carefully curated picture of perfection, but it was all starting to feel like a lie. She had been raised to take over the family business, to marry a man she didn't love, and to play the role of the dutiful daughter. But Lila was tired. Tired of living a life that wasn't hers. Tired of the expectations and the pressure to be someone she wasn't. That afternoon, in the quiet hum of the cafe, Lila made a decision. A bold, reckless decision. She would run away. Not far, but far enough. Far enough from the world her family had built for her. Far enough from the wedding she had no interest in attending. She grabbed her bag, stood up, and walked out of the cafe, her mind racing. She had a plan. She would disappear, right under her family's nose, by doing the one thing they would never expect. Working in the family hotel, but as an employee, not the heiress. A place where no one would know who she really was. It was the perfect disguise, a chance to escape, to find herself without the constant pressure to be perfect. Lila knew the hotel well. After all, it was her family's pride and joy. But she had never worked there before, never experienced the struggles of the people who actually ran it. As she arrived at the Grand Hotel later that day, the towering building seemed more intimidating than she remembered. The polished marble floors and extravagant chandeliers felt so far removed from the world she now wanted to be part of. She approached the front desk, her heart pounding in her chest, and introduced herself as a new employee. "I'll do whatever it takes," she told the manager, who gave her a skeptical look. He didn't know her, but he needed help, and that was enough. The next morning, Lila found herself in the hotel's kitchen, surrounded by chefs and dishwashers, the smell of sizzling food filling the air. She had never washed dishes before, never cleaned a hotel room, or dealt with irate guests. But here she was, scrubbing away at a pile of dirty plates, feeling the weight of the water as it splashed over her hands. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't the life she was born into, but for the first time in a long time, it felt real. What Lila didn't know, as she stood there with soap suds in her hair, was that this decision would change her life in ways she couldn't yet imagine. The hotel, a place she once thought of as just a business, would now be her refuge. It would also be the place where she would meet Jack, a man whose life was as far removed from hers as possible. Jack was the hotel's operations manager, sharp and no-nonsense. But there was something about him that intrigued her. Lila had no idea that Jack, who was just doing his job, would become more than just a colleague. He would be the one to help her find the courage to face the truth about herself, her family, and the life she had been running from. And, in the process, she would learn that sometimes, the most unexpected decisions can lead to the most life-changing experiences. As the days went by, Lila settled into a strange new routine. Each morning, she arrived at the hotel early, slipping through the back door where the staff entered, unnoticed by anyone who might recognize her. She put on the same simple uniform as the other workers, a far cry from the designer clothes she was used to wearing. She scrubbed dishes, cleaned floors, and helped the kitchen staff prepare meals. It was grueling work, but something about it felt freeing. For the first time in years, Lila could breathe without the constant pressure of her family's expectations weighing down on her. No one cared who she was here. No one was interested in her wealth or her last name. She was just another employee, like everyone else. But as she spent more time in the hotel, she began to notice something. The people around her, the staff, worked tirelessly, often without acknowledgement. Yet there was a kind of camaraderie among them that Lila had never experienced before in her privileged life. They laughed together during breaks, shared stories, and supported one another through tough shifts. She hadn't realized how much she missed real human connection until she found it here, in the unlikeliest of places. One evening, after finishing her shift, Lila sat alone in the staff break room, her hands sore from the day's work. As she absent-mindedly scrolled through her phone, she felt a soft tap on her shoulder. She turned around to see Jack standing there, a warm smile on his face. Jack was the operations manager at the hotel, the man who had been overseeing the staff's work and making sure everything ran smoothly. He had a reputation for being tough but fair, and Lila had always found him to be a bit intimidating. "Hey, Lila," he said, his voice low but kind. "I've been watching you work. You've been doing a great job. I wanted to thank you for stepping up and helping out so much." Lila smiled, trying to hide the surprise on her face. "Thanks, Jack. It's been different, but good. I'm happy to help." Jack hesitated for a moment before sitting down across from her. "I know you're new here, and I don't want to pry into your business, but I've noticed you've been putting in a lot of effort. It's rare to see someone so dedicated." Lila looked down at her hands, unsure how to respond. She wanted to tell him everything. The truth about who she was, why she was there, and how this job had become her escape from the life she felt trapped in. But something held her back. She wasn't ready to reveal herself. Yet, not even to Jack. Instead, she shrugged, offering a casual smile. "I guess I've just been trying to learn something new. It's not glamorous, but it's honest work." Jack raised an eyebrow, a flicker of curiosity in his eyes. "Honest work is the best kind of work," he said, then paused. "You know, we could really use someone like you around here. If you're interested, I can put in a good word for you. Maybe move you up to something a little more exciting." Lila's heart skipped a beat at the thought. A part of her had always known she was capable of more than just washing dishes, but hearing Jack say it out loud felt different. It was the first time someone here had acknowledged her potential beyond her current role, but she quickly pushed the thought aside. Moving up would mean standing out, and standing out meant eventually being recognized. And once she was recognized, her secret would be out. She wasn't ready for that yet. "Thanks, Jack," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I appreciate it, but I'm good for now. I like where I am." Jack seemed to understand, nodding slowly. "All right, well, the offer stands. Just know that you're doing a great job here." With that, he stood up and walked out, leaving Lila alone with her thoughts. She sat there for a long time, staring at the empty space where he had just been. Her mind raced. What if Jack was right? What if she could have more than just this? But the idea of revealing herself, of going back to her old life, terrified her. For the first time in a long time, she felt at peace in her anonymity. As the weeks passed, Lila continued to keep her distance from the world she had left behind. She worked harder than ever, her bond with the staff growing stronger. But as much as she tried to deny it, a small part of her yearned for something more. She missed her family, even if she couldn't stand the pressure they put on her. She missed the comforts of her old life, the luxury, the recognition. But she also realized that the more she stayed in the hotel, the more she discovered a side of herself she had never known, a side that didn't rely on wealth or status to feel valuable. And then one night, everything changed. It was a Friday, and the hotel was hosting a gala, one of the most important events of the year. Lila had avoided the event, not wanting to be recognized or reminded of the life she had left behind. She was washing dishes in the back when the kitchen door suddenly swung open, and she froze. There, standing in the doorway, was her father, William Brooks, the very man she had been running from. Lila's heart pounded in her chest as she quickly ducked behind a stack of plates, hoping he hadn't seen her. But it was too late. Her father's gaze met hers from across the room. His eyes widened with shock, but then, in a flash, his face turned to one of anger. "Lila!" he shouted, striding toward her with fury in his steps. The moment of peace she had found in her new life shattered in an instant. "Lila!" Her father's voice cut through the noise of the kitchen like a knife. She froze, her hands still gripping the dish she had been scrubbing, her heart racing in her chest. She hadn't seen him in weeks, not since she had walked away from the life she once knew. Now, here he was, standing in front of her in the kitchen of the very hotel she had been hiding in. She couldn't believe it. Her father's presence here, of all places, felt like the cruelest twist of fate. He stepped closer, his face red with anger, his jaw clenched tight. "What the hell are you doing here?" he demanded, his voice low and dangerous. "This isn't a place for you. You're supposed to be in the penthouse, not in some filthy kitchen with these people." Lila felt the sting of his words, but she stood her ground, refusing to back down. She wiped her hands on her apron, trying to steady herself, but the truth was, she wasn't sure how much longer she could keep up this charade. She wasn't the girl he expected her to be anymore. She wasn't the perfect daughter who followed every rule. "I'm doing exactly what I want to do," she replied quietly, her voice steady despite the fear that gripped her inside. "I'm working here, just like everyone else." Her father scoffed, his eyes narrowing as he looked her up and down. "You think you can just throw away everything I've built for you? This hotel, this family, it's all for you. And you throw it away just to wash dishes?" Lila's chest tightened at his words. She could feel the weight of his expectations, of everything he had done for her to live a life of luxury and success. But none of it had ever felt like hers. None of it had ever been what she wanted. It was all part of a life she had never chosen. "I didn't throw it away," Lila said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm finding my own way. I don't want to be the person you've always wanted me to be. I want to be someone real. Someone who makes their own choices." Her father's face twisted in disbelief. "Real? You think this is real?" He gestured to the kitchen around them. "This is where people like you end up when they throw away everything we've given them. You'll never survive here." Lila stood tall, refusing to let him intimidate her. She could feel the anger rising within her, but she pushed it down. She wasn't going to let him control her anymore. "I'm surviving just fine, and I'm not going back to the life you've planned for me. I'm done with it." The silence between them stretched out, thick with tension. Her father stared at her, his eyes flickering with something between disbelief and fury. He opened his mouth to say something more, but just as quickly, he closed it. Instead, he turned on his heel and walked out, leaving Lila standing there, her heart still pounding in her chest. She stayed in the kitchen for a long time after that, her hands trembling as she finished her shift. The encounter with her father had shaken her to her core, but something inside her had shifted as well. For the first time in her life, she had stood up for herself. She had made her choice, and no matter what her father said, she wasn't going back. Later that night, after the hotel had quieted down and most of the staff had gone home, Lila found herself alone in the break room again. She sat at the small table, her fingers tracing the edges of a coffee cup as her thoughts swirled. She had never imagined that her life would turn out this way. She had thought she would always be trapped in the world her family had built for her. But now, she was beginning to see a different future. A future where she wasn't controlled by anyone but herself. Just as she was lost in thought, the door to the break room opened, and Jack walked in. His expression was unreadable, but there was something different in the way he looked at her tonight. "Lila," he said softly, his voice breaking the silence. "Can we talk?" Lila looked up, startled. She wasn't sure what to expect from him, but she nodded, setting the cup down. "Of course," she said, her heart still racing from the confrontation with her father. Jack sat down across from her, his hands folded on the table. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, Jack broke the silence. "I know about your father," he said, his voice low. "And I know why you're here. You don't have to explain yourself to me." Lila stared at him, surprised by his words. "You do?" Jack nodded. "I don't know everything, but I know enough. I see how hard you're working, how much you're putting into this. And I respect that. I just want you to know that you don't have to hide here. You don't have to be anyone but yourself." Lila's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't realized how much she needed to hear those words until now. She had been hiding from everyone, including herself, for so long. But here, with Jack, she felt like she could finally be herself. And maybe, just maybe, that was the beginning of something real. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't know what I'm doing yet, but I'm starting to figure it out." Jack smiled softly, his eyes meeting hers. "You're not alone in this, Lila. You don't have to be." The words hung in the air between them, a promise, a new beginning. And for the first time in a long time, Lila allowed herself to believe it. The days following that night with her father felt like a turning point for Lila. She had never expected such a confrontation, but it had opened something inside her, a realization that she couldn't continue living under her family's control. She spent more time at the hotel, working harder than ever, and slowly, the sense of freedom she had longed for began to feel more real. She had discovered a part of herself in the simple act of washing dishes, in the laughter of the staff, in the quiet moments she had stolen for herself. Jack's words echoed in her mind every day. "You don't have to hide here." They were the first words of support she had heard in a long time. He had seen her not as the heiress she had been born into, but as the person she was trying to become. That night, after their conversation, something had shifted between them. The walls she had built around herself slowly began to crumble, and she found herself letting him in, just a little. One evening, after another long day of work, Lila sat on a bench in the hotel garden, her thoughts swirling. She had never been this uncertain about her future before. On one hand, there was her family, with all its expectations, its wealth, and its power. But on the other hand, there was this hotel, the staff, and Jack. It wasn't the glamorous life she had been raised to lead, but it felt real. It felt like something she could actually control. As she sat there, staring out at the city lights in the distance, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned to see Jack walking toward her, his hands in his pockets. He smiled when he saw her, but there was something more in his eyes now, something deeper. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, his voice warm. Lila nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "I could use the company." Jack sat down beside her, both of them looking out at the city in silence for a moment. Finally, he spoke. "How are you holding up?" Lila took a deep breath, her gaze fixed on the skyline. "I don't really know," she admitted. "I'm still trying to figure out what I want. I've always been told what to do, what to be. But now I'm here, and it feels like I'm lost." Jack turned to her, his expression softening. "You're not lost, Lila. You're just finding your way. And that's okay. It's a process, but you don't have to do it alone." Lila felt a wave of gratitude wash over her, something she hadn't felt in a long time. She had spent so many years hiding behind walls, pretending to be someone she wasn't. But with Jack, she felt seen for the first time. And for once, it didn't feel like she had to keep pretending. "I know," she whispered. "I'm just scared. Scared of what comes next. Scared of what my family will do if they find out." Jack reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch reassuring. "You don't have to worry about them right now. Focus on yourself, on what you want. The rest will come in time." Lila's heart raced as she looked at him. There was something in his eyes, a quiet understanding, that made her feel like everything was going to be okay. Maybe she didn't have all the answers yet, but with Jack by her side, she was starting to believe that she could find them. The sound of the hotel staff bustling inside the building reminded them both of the work that awaited them. But for now, in this quiet moment, the world outside seemed a little less overwhelming. "Thank you," Lila said softly, "for being here. For not giving up on me." Jack smiled, his eyes filled with warmth. "I'm not going anywhere, Lila. You've got this." That night, as Lila lay in bed, she thought about what Jack had said. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she had a choice. The future wasn't written in stone. She didn't have to follow the path her family had set for her. She could carve her own. And no matter how difficult it was, she was ready to take the first step. The next morning, as she got ready for another day at the hotel, Lila felt something inside her shift. She was no longer the girl running away from her responsibilities. She was the woman deciding her own fate. And with Jack's support, she was ready to face whatever came next. The hotel, once just a place to hide, was now a symbol of her freedom. And she was finally beginning to see it as a place where she could build the life she wanted, not the life her father had planned for her. The weeks passed, and Lila's life continued to evolve in ways she hadn't imagined. The hotel became more than just a place to escape from her family's control. It became her home. The staff had welcomed her, and the simple, everyday work she had once thought of as menial had given her a sense of purpose. She no longer felt lost. She had found a part of herself she hadn't even known was missing. But there was still something tugging at her heart, a quiet fear that she had been pushing aside for too long. What would happen if her family found out where she was? What would they do if they realized the heiress of the Brooks Empire had been working as a dishwasher in one of their own hotels? One evening, as the hotel bustled with activity, Lila sat in the staff lounge during her break, a cup of coffee warming her hands. She had just finished a long shift and was looking forward to a few moments of peace before going back to the chaos. But her peace was interrupted when Jack walked in, his usual calm demeanor replaced by something more serious. "Lila," he said, his voice soft but urgent. "We need to talk." Lila looked up, a knot forming in her stomach. The look on Jack's face made her uneasy. "What's going on?" Jack hesitated, glancing around the room as if making sure no one was listening. "It's your father," he said finally. "He's been asking around about you. I've heard rumors. He's coming here, to the hotel." Lila's heart skipped a beat. She stood up, the cup of coffee slipping from her hand, but she didn't care. "What? Why? How?" Jack stepped closer, his voice lowering. "I'm not sure, but it's clear he's looking for you. He's been asking staff members if they've seen a woman who fits your description. He's not going to stop until he finds you." Lila's mind raced. She couldn't go back to that life. She couldn't face her father, not after everything. She had finally found peace, a sense of freedom she had never known before. The thought of returning to her father's world, with all its rules and expectations, felt suffocating. "I can't go back, Jack," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I can't." Jack placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch firm and reassuring. "You don't have to go back, but we need to figure out what to do next. Your father isn't going to stop looking for you." Lila looked into his eyes, feeling a surge of emotion. In that moment, she realized just how much Jack had come to mean to her. He had been there for her when no one else had, and now, with her world falling apart, he was the one person she could turn to. She wasn't alone anymore. "I don't want to go back," she said, her voice steady now. "But I don't know how to stay here. I don't know what to do next." Jack gave her a small, understanding smile. "You don't have to figure it all out right now. We'll take it one step at a time. But whatever happens, I'm with you. You don't have to face this alone." Lila nodded, feeling a sense of relief wash over her. She had never imagined she would find someone like Jack. Someone who cared about her not because of her family's money, but because of who she was. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she mattered. Later that night, as the hotel quieted down, Lila found herself standing on the rooftop, looking out over the city. The lights below seemed distant, almost out of reach. She had come so far from the person she had once been, yet she still didn't know what the future held. The fear of what her father would do, of losing everything she had worked so hard to build, weighed heavily on her shoulders. But as she stood there, the cool night air wrapping around her, she realized something. She wasn't the same person she had been when she arrived at the hotel. She had found her strength, her voice, and for the first time, she was living on her own terms. She wasn't going to let fear control her. She wasn't going to let her past dictate her future. The sound of footsteps behind her made her turn. Jack was there, standing a few feet away, watching her with a quiet intensity. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, Jack took a step forward. "You're not alone in this," he said softly, his voice full of sincerity. "I'm here, Lila. We'll figure this out together." Lila felt a lump form in her throat. She couldn't remember the last time someone had cared for her like this. She had spent so many years feeling like an outsider in her own life. But now, with Jack by her side, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she could find her place in the world. "Thank you," she whispered, the words barely audible, but filled with all the gratitude she had been holding inside. Jack smiled, and for the first time in a long time, Lila felt hope. She didn't know what would happen next, but with Jack beside her, she was ready to face whatever came her way. And maybe, just maybe, she could finally find the happiness she had been searching for all along. The following days felt like a whirlwind for Lila. After that quiet moment on the rooftop with Jack, she had made a decision. She wouldn't let fear control her. She wouldn't let her past dictate her future. But she still wasn't sure what the future held. Her father was still looking for her, and she knew it was only a matter of time before he found out where she was. She had to stay ahead, to keep hiding in plain sight. But deep down, something had changed. She was no longer just running away, she was running towards something. The hotel had become more than just a hiding place. It had become her home, a place where she was respected for who she was, not for her name or her wealth. The staff had come to see her as one of their own, not just the heir to the Brooks empire. She had built relationships here, worked hard, and learned more about herself than she ever thought possible. But with her father closing in, it was becoming harder to keep the secret. One afternoon, as she was going over inventory in the hotel's office, Jack walked in, his usual calm demeanor replaced by a hint of urgency. "Lila," he said, his voice soft but serious. "We need to talk. It's about your father." Lila's heart sank. She had been expecting this. She had known it would come to this. She looked up at Jack, her expression guarded. "What about him?" Jack walked toward her, lowering his voice as he sat down across from her. "He's getting closer. I don't know how, but he's found someone who works here. They've been asking questions, trying to track you down. Lila, he's not going to give up. I know you've been trying to stay hidden, but we need to figure out what to do." Lila's mind raced. She had spent so long keeping her identity a secret, blending in with the staff, doing the work of an ordinary employee. But the walls were closing in, and she couldn't keep running forever. She needed a plan. She needed to make a choice. "I don't know what to do anymore, Jack," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can't go back to that life. I can't go back to being someone I'm not. But I don't want to lose this either. I don't want to lose what I've found here." Jack's eyes softened as he looked at her, understanding written all over his face. "You won't lose this, Lila. You've built something real here, something that matters. But you need to make the choice. You can't keep running forever." Lila stared down at her hands, her fingers clenched around the edge of the table. She had never felt more torn in her life. She had a chance to live a life on her own terms, to be with people who cared about her for who she was, not for her wealth. But her family, her father, was never going to let her go. He would drag her back into that world, into that suffocating life of expectations and control. "What if I can't choose?" she whispered, more to herself than to Jack. "You don't have to make that decision alone," Jack said gently, his voice full of warmth. "Whatever happens, I'm here for you. We'll figure it out together." Lila looked up at him, her heart swelling with emotion. She had never felt so vulnerable, so uncertain, but with Jack by her side, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she could find the strength to make the right choice. She wasn't alone anymore. Later that night, as the hotel settled into a quiet lull, Lila sat in the break room, the weight of everything pressing down on her. She thought about her family, about the life she had run away from. And she thought about Jack, the one person who had stood by her through it all, who had believed in her when no one else did. She knew what she had to do. She wasn't going to let her father control her anymore. She wasn't going to be a pawn in his game. But she couldn't keep hiding forever. It was time to confront the past, to face her father and tell him the truth. She had to stop running. The next morning, after a restless night of uncertainty, Lila made her decision. She walked into Jack's office, determination in her step. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady. "I'm ready to face him." Jack looked up, his expression a mix of concern and pride. "Are you sure? Once you do this, there's no going back." Lila nodded, her chin lifted in resolve. "I'm done hiding. It's time to take control of my life." Jack stood and walked over to her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "I'm with you, Lila. Whatever happens, we'll handle it together." With those words, Lila felt a surge of confidence. She wasn't just taking control of her own life. She was taking control of her future. And no matter what her father said, no matter what he did, she wasn't going to let him define who she was ever again. The following days felt like a blur as Lila prepared herself for the inevitable confrontation. She had made the decision. She was going to face her father, no longer running from him or from the life he had forced upon her. But as the day of the confrontation drew closer, the weight of her decision grew heavier. She had spent so long trying to escape her past, trying to hide from the world her family had created for her. But now, standing at the edge of it, she knew she couldn't run any longer. It was time to confront her fears, to take control of her own destiny. Jack had been with her every step of the way, offering his support and encouragement, and now, as she stood in front of the hotel's grand entrance, she felt a sense of calm wash over her. She wasn't facing this alone. The moment she walked into the lobby, her heart began to race. It was as if the weight of the world had suddenly landed on her shoulders. The polished floors, the crystal chandeliers, the luxury that surrounded her, it all felt suffocating now. The life she had once been a part of seemed so distant, so foreign. But today, she wasn't that Lila anymore. Today, she was someone else. Someone who could stand on her own 2 feet and make her own choices. She walked past the front desk, her eyes fixed on the elevator at the far end of the lobby. The elevator that would take her to her father's suite. The suite she had once thought was her future. As she reached the elevator, she pressed the button, feeling the weight of her decision settle deep in her chest. The doors opened, and she stepped inside, her fingers gripping the railing as the elevator began its slow ascent. When the elevator doors opened on the top floor, Lila was met by the cold, sterile hallway of her father's penthouse. The walls were lined with expensive art, the floors covered in plush carpet. Everything about it screamed power, wealth, and control. It was the world her father had created, and for the longest time, it had been her prison. She took a deep breath and walked down the hall, her footsteps echoing in the silence. When she reached the door to her father's suite, she hesitated. But then she knocked, her heart pounding in her chest. Moments later, the door opened, and there he stood. William Brooks. The man who had spent her entire life shaping her into someone she didn't want to be. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, his voice cold and sharp, his gaze filled with disbelief. "You've caused enough trouble already, Lila. I've been looking for you." Lila stood tall, her shoulders squared as she met his gaze. "I'm not hiding anymore," she said, her voice steady despite the fear that still lingered in her chest. "I'm done running from you, from the life you've tried to force on me." Her father's face twisted with anger. "You think you can just walk away from everything? From your responsibilities? From the family business?" Lila shook her head, her eyes never leaving his. "No, I'm not walking away. I'm choosing a different path, one where I get to decide who I am." There was a long pause as her father stared at her, his expression unreadable. Finally, he spoke again, his voice low. "You don't know what you're doing, Lila. You're throwing away everything I've worked for." "I'm not throwing anything away," she said, her voice firm. "I'm finding myself, and I don't need your approval to do that." Her father stepped back, a look of frustration crossing his face. "You're making a mistake," he muttered, but Lila didn't flinch. She knew she wasn't making a mistake. For the first time in her life, she was making a choice that was entirely her own. "You can't control me anymore," Lila said, her words steady and final. "I've made my decision, and I'm not going back." There was silence between them for a long moment before her father finally spoke, his voice quieter now, almost defeated. "I never thought you'd be like this, Lila. I thought I raised you better." Lila felt a pang of sadness, but she pushed it aside. "You raised me to be what you wanted, not who I am." With those words, she turned and walked away. She didn't look back, not even once. As she made her way down the hallway, she felt lighter, freer than she had in years. She had faced her father, told him the truth, and for the first time in her life, she felt like she was truly in control of her own future. When she reached the elevator, she pressed the button to go down, her mind racing with a mix of emotions. She didn't know what the future held, but she was ready to find out. She wasn't going to let fear hold her back anymore. She had made her choice, and now she was going to live with it. She was going to build the life she wanted, one step at a time. As the elevator doors closed, and the familiar hum filled the silence, Lila finally allowed herself to relax. She wasn't the same person who had walked into that hotel months ago. She was someone new, someone stronger, someone who knew what it meant to take control of her own destiny. And for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. As Lila walked out of her father's penthouse, she felt a wave of relief wash over her. The confrontation, the words, the years of hidden resentment and fear, everything that had been weighing her down seemed to lift in that one moment. She had done it. She had finally faced the person who had tried to control her life for so long. And for the first time, she had stood up for herself. She felt different, stronger, more at peace with the choices she had made. The elevator doors closed behind her, and she descended to the lower levels of the hotel. As the car moved down, Lila's mind raced. What would her father do next? Would he try to drag her back into the life she had so desperately run away from? But there was no turning back now. She had made her choice, and she had chosen her own path. When the elevator reached the ground floor, Lila stepped out into the quiet lobby. The hotel felt different now, more like a home than it ever had before. She no longer felt like an outsider, hiding in the shadows of her family's empire. The staff had accepted her, not for who she was supposed to be, but for who she truly was. She had found herself here, in the midst of the very life she had once rejected. As she made her way to the back exit, she saw Jack standing near the door, waiting for her. He was leaning against the wall, his arms crossed, looking as calm as ever, but there was a glint of concern in his eyes. He had been her rock throughout this entire journey, and now, as she approached him, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. She wasn't alone anymore. "Hey," Jack said softly, pushing himself off the wall as she got closer. "How did it go?" Lila took a deep breath, her chest still tight with the adrenaline of the confrontation. But there was no fear in her eyes now, only a sense of clarity. "I told him the truth. I'm done pretending, Jack. I'm done living the life he planned for me." Jack's face softened, and he stepped closer to her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. "I'm proud of you, Lila. You've done something that takes a lot of courage." Lila smiled, feeling a weight lift off her shoulders. She hadn't realized just how much she had been carrying until that moment. "Thank you, Jack. I couldn't have done it without you. You've been there for me when no one else was." They stood there for a moment, the weight of the day settling in, but also a quiet sense of peace between them. The world outside seemed a little less overwhelming now, as if the path ahead wasn't so hard to see. For the first time in her life, Lila felt like she could finally breathe. "I'm ready to move forward," Lila said quietly, her voice full of conviction. "I don't know what's next, but I know I have to do this on my own. I need to live for me now, not for anyone else." Jack nodded, his expression serious but supportive. "And you will. Whatever happens, Lila, I'm here for you. You've got this." The simplicity of his words, the sincerity behind them, made her heart swell with emotion. She wasn't alone. Not anymore. Later that night, as Lila lay in bed, she thought about everything that had happened, how she had faced her father, how she had taken control of her life. It wasn't going to be easy, and she knew there would be challenges ahead. But for the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful. She was on the right path, even if she didn't have all the answers yet. Tomorrow, she would wake up and begin building the life she had always wanted. A life that was truly hers, free from the expectations and control of others. She wasn't going to let fear or doubt hold her back anymore. She had a future to create, and she was ready to take it on. With Jack by her side and the hotel now feeling like her true home, Lila knew that whatever came next, she could handle it. For the first time in years, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be, and she was finally ready to embrace the life she had always wanted. Weeks went by, and Lila's life began to settle into a new rhythm. The hotel, once just a place of refuge, had now become her sanctuary. She wasn't just working here anymore. She was truly living here, surrounded by people who respected her for who she was, not for the name she carried. The more she immersed herself in her work and the daily operations of the hotel, the more she realized how much she had grown. She had learned to trust herself, to make decisions on her own, and to embrace the freedom she had fought so hard to claim. But even as Lila thrived in this new chapter of her life, the shadow of her family, particularly her father, still loomed over her. She knew he hadn't given up searching for her, but she was no longer the frightened girl who had fled from her responsibilities. She was stronger now, more confident, and more determined to create a life that was her own. One afternoon, as the sun began to set and cast a golden glow over the hotel, Lila stood in the lobby, taking in the familiar sights and sounds of the place she had come to call home. She had spent so many years feeling like an outsider in her own life, but now, for the first time, she felt like she belonged. The staff smiled as they passed by, exchanging pleasantries, and the guests went about their business, unaware of the transformation happening behind the scenes. Lila had found her place, and she wasn't going anywhere. As she made her way to the back office to check on some reports, Jack appeared in the doorway. He had become a constant presence in her life, someone she had come to rely on and trust. He had been there for her through every step of this journey, and now, he stood before her with a look of quiet pride. "Lila," Jack said, his voice calm but filled with something more. "There's someone here to see you." Lila raised an eyebrow, a little surprised. "Who?" "Your father," Jack said, his tone careful. "He's here, and he's asking for you." Lila felt her heart skip a beat. She had known this moment would come, but she wasn't sure if she was ready. She had faced him once before, but this time, it felt different. She wasn't the same person she had been when she left him. She had built a life here, and she wasn't willing to give it up. "Okay," Lila said, her voice steady. "I'll see him." Jack gave her a reassuring nod. "I'll be here, whatever you need." Lila took a deep breath and made her way to the front of the hotel, her steps measured and calm. When she reached the lobby, her father was standing near the entrance. his face a mixture of frustration and determination. He looked the same as he always had, powerful, imposing, and completely in control. But there was something different about him now. Lila wasn't afraid anymore. She approached him slowly, her eyes meeting his with a quiet defiance. "You've been looking for me," she said, her voice firm. "Well, here I am." Her father's eyes softened just slightly, but there was no warmth in them. "Lila, I've been worried about you. You can't just walk away from everything, from your family, from your responsibilities." Lila shook her head. "I didn't walk away, father. I found something I never had before. I found myself. And I'm not going back to the life you wanted for me." He took a step forward, his voice lowering. "This isn't you, Lila. You were meant for more than this. You were meant to take over the family business, to keep the Brooks name strong. You can't just throw all of that away." "I'm not throwing anything away," she said, her voice unwavering. "I'm building something for myself. Something real." There was a long silence as her father looked at her, his gaze hardening once again. "You're making a mistake," he muttered. Lila stood tall, not backing down. "Maybe it's a mistake in your eyes, but it's my life, and I'm going to live it on my own terms." Her father stared at her for a long moment, and for the first time in a long time, Lila didn't feel the weight of his expectations. She didn't feel the pressure to conform to his vision of who she should be. She had made her choice, and she was at peace with it. "I'm done fighting you," she said, her voice calm but resolute. "I found my own path, and I'm not going to let you take it from me." With that, she turned and walked away, her heart light as she made her way back to the staff area. As she passed by Jack, she gave him a small smile. "Is it over?" Jack asked, his voice filled with quiet concern. Lila nodded, her smile growing. "It is. I'm free." And for the first time in her life, Lila felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be, living her own life, on her own terms, without fear or regret. The future was still uncertain, but she was no longer afraid to face it. She was ready for whatever came next.